Fatshark has teased a fresh new update coming at the end of March. So far, this update could literally mean anything coming, but we do have some knowledge we can harvest that could clue us in on what they could be planning. More so, it could literally be everything we're going to go over, one thing, or kind of a mix and match of what has been speculated so far. However, as I see it, there are three main ways this update could approach being the best thing ever style update that they're trying to kind of sort of market it as being. First would be new missions or stories to kind of structure and build that narrative that they're kind of looking to build in the future. Others would be new weapons, new types of weapons, new marks, things of that nature, and new classes, or specifically specializations of the existing classes we currently have. Because they are keeping this information tight until the next comm link that addresses it more, which will likely drop next week, this will all be highly speculative. I will be backing this information up as much as possible though, with sources either data mined or from interviews that I've scavenged, so without further ado, let's jump in. First up for our story, really the story here would be expanded by more missions and more story elements being added. We know from interviews this is already a very strong key area that they want to focus on going forward, with dialogue lines furthering this by kind of having player characters question why we're dedicating so many resources to Utoma. What's making this such a strategic asset for the Inquisition and kind of so valuable that they're willing to go to the length they are with the sort of kind of messy conscription that they're employing to get us rejects in. I'd really like to see more missions going forward as well that kind of act as actual raid encounters of sorts with unique mechanics that are unique specifically to that mission and diverge from the standard boilerplate approach that we've kind of seen in missions so far. Of course, these missions are still fun, but I would like to see kind of more unique aspects to the point where if I pick a mission, it feels very unique than picking another mission. Because we can't data mine these story elements and they're very careful in what they give us though, we really kind of have to leave it at just that. And for now, we'll just go into more concrete topics that we do have data on. So next up would be weapons. So what type of weapons can we expect and how are they going to potentially plan to expand our armory for purging? Going way back, all the way to the closed beta, there is a bug in the player insignia menu, and this bug revealed every single insignia cosmetic for every weapon, which also reveals kind of this individual weapon mechanic, which we might actually be getting in the future. But it also revealed every planned weapon that they had at this point. And we've already had some of these items sort of delivered to us that weren't originally at launch, which kind of includes sort of the Thunder Hammer and the Power Maul that was for the Ogren. But two things haven't been added yet, which is primarily the Melt-A-Gun and two-handed chain axes. The Melt-A-Gun, from what I've seen in the actual code base kind of scrounging around, it's going to behave very similar to the Plasma Gun, especially with sort of peril building of the percentages and managing that as its sort of ammo property. And hopefully it's going to have its own damage properties that set it apart and create its own functional niche. As for the two-handed chain axe, I'm kind of wondering if this is going to be more horde clearing or if it's going to follow our kind of axe styles, where they're more high damage output towards one thing. Of course, if you throw brutal momentum on it, we all know it's going to be great at horde clearing anyway, so who's to say what its niche is going to end up being? There's also an interview done with Darktide devs a while back, and in this they also further suggested the game providing access to both heavy bolters and power fists. Both of these would suggest new weapons coming for our Ogren boys, and would also give our Ogren better armor penetration minigun than the heavy stubber currently provides. Honestly, I'm also pretty excited to do some not-so-bare knuckle boxing with Plague Ogre, so if these weapons end up getting added, I'd be pretty excited. I feel, though, that out of the kind of weapons this half represent much more speculative items than the previous leak, as these are just kind of coming from an interview, rapid-fire question format, so it's possible they might not have had that much confidence in those answers, but it does at least give us a clue on the things that they're considering at least. God, please just give me my microwave gun. Next up are classes. So for classes, we do have some hauls from the data mines, and these have already made their circulation across the internet, but now that we're getting more actual new content, it's good to take a revisit on them. I couldn't find anything though, other than just overview articles for these classes, but I did at least pull some source code and confirm some of their findings, so I would at least say that they're somewhat credible. They even provided values like percentages for some of these buffs, but I really don't want to be diving that far into these since they've been on the shelf for so long. These are going to be so subject to change that I don't know how reliable these numbers are going to be. Even if they're pulled from the code, at this point, with all the buffs we've been adding, these numbers are likely to have changed themselves to make sure that everything's staying sort of kosher and at the same baseline function. First up for our prospective class specializations, though, is the Ogryn Gun Luggers. This class focuses more on Ogryns if they were veterans that just took a bunch of roids. Some of the highlights that we can expect for them to have abilities would be shots that cost no ammo, giving you essentially literal orc logic on how your gun's behaving, so would be really rad with high capacity weapons to just never let go. More damage resistance wild brace, so hey, if you're aiming, you can just keep on aiming. Toughness regen on ranged kills, which would be fantastic for building an Ogryn ranged class out of. More damage to suppressed enemies, and also an ability which would operate, it seems, similar to the volley stance that we get from veterans, where we're getting higher gun performance. In this case, they hint at it having a higher fire rate and more damage to close range enemies, so it could be a pretty interesting play. For veterans, we would be getting the new squad leader specialization. These would focus on veterans being less like tacti snipers and more like commissars, minus shooting you in the back of the head, of course. Some of the highlights that I've seen would be more damage to tagged enemies, more damage for allies in your coherency, and more toughness potentially being granted to your allies. All in all, it's going to be kind of like you're a bit of a standard bearer and providing a lot of buffs. It's going to be a very buff heavy support character, and I think that could be very fun to play with. They also did mention in the leak that you might control a squad of minion guardsmen, but to me this feels like it would be very clunky. Even if this is the intention, I could see this being scrapped and replaced with something that affects the actual squad itself. It could, however, be pretty rad if they pull together an AI that manages to navigate a broom closet, so we'll have to wait and see. Zealots, we don't actually get a subtitle yet for them. The data miners couldn't quite find anything, but for now we can pen it as the Purifier. This one seems to focus on, well, just that, purifying, and we know what that euphemism means, some of the more heinous beasts while supporting other players not rotting to death from their corruption. The highlights include corruption healing, passively, so that would be awesome. More damage against infected or unyielding, they kind of didn't make that super well known. If it's unyielding, that could be pretty good against anti-bosses, especially if you're bringing something disgusting single damage wise like the Thammer. You could really eliminate boss encounters almost entirely. Corruption damage resistance, which plays in hand with our corruption resistance regaining, or melee damage, which is pretty bog standard for building a specialization for a melee class, and sharing your crit chances, which I think could be very fun for a squad of suicidal zealots to be running into with each other. Finally, the Psyker Protectorate. This one seems to be trying to mitigate the Psyker's more fragile characteristics and elevate them to the status of Space Wizard tank. The highlights from what I've seen would be us getting a Psyker Fortress, which sounds rad as hell, and I feel like it would function very similar to the bubble shield that we see gets associated with our assassination targets. And if so, I would love an extra layer of toughness to associate with my Psyker that they pulled from the warp. We also would be getting a special lightning chaining ability, which is distinct from our Surge Staff. It could be something where if things are hitting our bubble shield, they're getting a sort of shock damage backlash from it. Or we could also be able to sort of disband the bubble shield itself and cause a damage bloom of sorts against things, which would be also pretty rad. We're also going to be replacing the Brain Burst potentially with Psychic Throwing Knives. It just sounds rad enough that we're okay with having zero specifics on this. Of course, everything that we've just went through for all of these specializations is both confirmed in the code as something they're pursuing, but also it's going to be highly speculative. Again, these things have been on the shelf for a long time since launch, and with so many buffs, changes, tweaks, they could look radically different. Nothing like what we've gone over, so take everything that we've seen so far with many pinches of salt. Personally, I think I'm most excited for the Gun Lugger. as I really want to fire that heavy stubber just indefinitely. But the Psyker and Guardsman specializations really seem like they have potential to change how they're interacting with the rest of the squad and the squad dynamic, so we'll have to wait and see. They all seem really cool. The Zealot, in my opinion, sounds a little weak right now, since our current specialization feels very strong, but this could also just be a weakness that is stemming from the data mining nature of this, where we're not able to get more of those tasty details. And also there's just so much time for Fatshark to build, tweak, and finalize this that it could end up looking really nice in the final product. So again, we'll have to see. But that's it for this video. If you liked the video, drop a like, comment if I missed anything, and have a great day. See ya!